massive naval German liner sailing off the coast of East Prussia, now known as Poland. Aboard her roughly 10,000 souls, all is well aboard the vessel. The ocean calm, the night breeze chilly, the snow softly and quietly falling. In the water freezing cold like nails and knives stab you in the back. Though up at the bridge, commotion is erupting between four captains, and one order will soon end up dooming the liner and everyone on board forever. Hi, I'm your friend, Historic Tides, and welcome to the sinking of the famous German passenger liner, the MV Wilhelm Gustloff. The date is January 30th, 1945. Around midday, World War II is drawing to a close, and an old German naval liner is getting ready to carry refugees from Gustloff, Germany to Kiel, Germany. The Red Army of the Soviet Union, USSR, led by Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, are planning to bomb the city of Gustloff. During the first few years of destruction and terror of the Second World War, and the seemingly constant victories of Nazi Germany, the Allies floundered from the past war and the Great Depression in 1929. However, now with the United States support, Germany is moved to a crawling. Japan successfully wounded United States battleships in Pearl Harbor and forced the United States to join the war efforts. On December 8, 1941, the Latin America countries such as Brazil, Mexico, Costa Rica, and Cuba also joined the Allied forces. Now with the United States at the forefront of the war, Nazi Germany is being pushed by the Allies. Britain, the Soviet Union, Canada, and now the United States and Latin America, along with other Allied nations, have regrouped and allowed the Allies to come back harder than before. With the new forces of the Allies, the terror, destruction, triumph of Germany began to shatter. An ocean liner by the name of Wilhelm Gustloff, named in honor of the leader of the Swiss Nazi Party, was built in August 1936. She was originally going to be named Adolf Hitler after the leader of Nazi Germany. However, Hitler decided to rename the ship in honor of the late Swiss general. MV Wilhelm Gustloff was a pretty successful naval liner of the time, though she couldn't really compete against the massive giants in the transatlantic crossing in the 1930s, such as Queen Normandy, and Rex. Even German superliners such as Bremen and Europa also dominated the transatlantic crossing. MV Wilhelm Gustloff was a much smaller vessel compared to these massive ocean liners of 1936, but it was larger than the ocean liners that came previously at the time. MV Wilhelm Gustloff wasn't really the kind of vessel that you could just buy a ticket for. You would have to be offered a ride on the Gustloff by Nazi German officials. People only granted access by Nazi military were allowed to sail on the ship. MV Wilhelm Gustloff was 208.5 meters or 684 feet in length, 25,048 gross registered tons, and could displace 25,000 tons of water, and had a capacity of 1,460 to 1,465 total passengers. 489 cabins plus 417 crew members. Wilhelm Gustloff was a pretty beloved vessel by the Nazi German Empire. Returning to January 30th, MV Wilhelm Gustloff was being filled with German refugees from Gustloff. She was commissioned to ferry passengers from Gustloff, Germany to Kiel, Germany. Escorting the Wilhelm Gustloff would be another ocean liner by the name of Hansa, and two torpedo boats, so if I pronounce this wrong by the way, Lu and TF-19, scheduled to depart at the same time. At half past midnight, Wilhelm Gustloff and her convoy departed Gustloff in Germany, bound for Kiel, Germany. The departure is not without calamity. Passengers forced their way onto the ship, past German soldiers, which so many passengers forced themselves on board. The ship became overcrowded and around 9,000 to 10,000 passengers squished like a sandwich onto the ship. Made for only 1,465 passengers, the ship is so crowded even a child can barely move through the halls of the ship. Up on the bridge, more commotion is erupting among the four captains aboard Wilhelm Gustloff. Ordered Captain Frederick Peterson, personally appointed by Hitler, Lieutenant Commander Wilhelm Zahn, and 2 unnamed Marine captains. With 4 captains on the ship, commands are often ignored or totally constricted. Tonight, all 4 captains are arguing over what route to take to Kiel, Germany. Lieutenant Zahn argued they should sail Wilhelm Gustloff in the deep waters of the Baltic Sea at full speed with a zigzag pattern, where mines are more dangerous. Captain Peterson disagreed, proposing sailing Wilhelm Gustloff hugging the coastline of Prussia, then occupied by Germany. Peterson didn't believe Wilhelm Gustloff would be able to maintain speed due to the Baltic Sea. It would be safer to stick to the coastline and avoid submarines and mines. After a few minutes, the route is chosen, sailing in the deep and try to zigzag or keep top speed efficiently through the Baltic Sea. Shortly after departing from Cuxhaven and selecting the route of the forward Wilhelm Gustloff, Hans started having mechanical problems. She reported to the captains of Wilhelm Gustloff and turned back to Cuxhaven escorted by TP-19, while Lou keeps sailing well ahead of the Wilhelm Gustloff. All is well the first night aboard the MV Wilhelm Gustloff. Apart from the passengers, who are very uncomfortable from how crowded the ship is. Eventually, one of the captains gave order to have passengers wear life jackets in case of emergencies, but no one listens due to the heat and stuffiness inside the vessel. January 31st, 1945, 9 p.m. Central European Time, Wilhelm Gustloff is still sailing in the deep waters of the Baltic Sea. Captain Peterson false reports of German minesweepers. Captain Peterson realized and makes a decision that he must turn Wilhelm Gustloff's navigation lights on. With her lights on, Wilhelm Gustloff became extremely visible. So visible, U-boat S-13, captained by Captain Alexander Ivish Mirsky, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, put the name down, saw the Wilhelm Gustloff and proceeds to follow behind the Gustloff, waiting for the perfect time to strike. At 9 p.m., the lights of the Wilhelm Gustloff were turned off once again. It was too late. S-13 fired not 1, not 2, but 3 torpedoes at the Wilhelm Gustloff on her port side. All 3 torpedoes meet their mark. On the Wilhelm Gustloff. First torpedo hits the Gustloff near the bow inside the cargo holds and takes down 2 watertight compartments. The second torpedo meets its mark in the midship, near the 2 second lifeboats on the port side, taking down 1 watertight compartment. The last torpedo hit the center midship below the funnel of the Wilhelm Gustloff. Once all torpedoes made their mark, Wilhelm Gustloff began to rapidly roll over to port. A few passengers and crew already died from the torpedo strikes aboard the Gustloff. Hans Rittner, a naval assistant on board the Wilhelm Gustloff, would later report, "There are 3 detonations far below which shook the whole ship. Lights go out and Wilhelm Gustloff commences to roll to port. I am thrown against the wall." An unknown survivor will later recount, "I have no idea how long I laid unconscious on the deck, but I was awakened by live steam flowing into my cabin from the engine room. The steam smelled like quartnite and was saturated with fine dust which blinded me. As I looked about me in a daze, I quickly realized what had happened. We had been torpedoed." After the impact, Wilhelm Gustloff continues its endless rolling over the port when her lights suddenly activate once again. While a passenger by the name of Ebbe von Adel, so I pronounced that wrong, stated his testimony, suddenly it seems every light in the ship had come on. The whole ship was blazing with lights, and the siren sounded over the sea. As the ship continued her sink, her crew rushed to the boats to get them ready for lowering, but there is already a greater situation than they expected. The gearing on the davits and chains are frozen and must be broken. Even for the boats that haven't been frozen, the drastic list of the Wilhelm Gustloff made the starboard side boats impossible to launch. Attempting to do so would crash the lifeboat into the hull of the ship, causing catastrophic damage and injuries to passengers. As the tragic sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff progresses or continues, the situation aboard the ship grows increasingly dire, both for inside its confines or those on deck. The vessel, once a symbol of safety and refuge, transforms into an unimaginable labyrinth, as the relentless onslaught of water renders the narrow hallways treacherous or chaotic. Passengers struggle to navigate the claustrophobic corridors, often finding themselves assured by obstacles and debris. The fear and desperation in their hearts is palpable as they fight against the overpowering force of nature, inundating their floating sanctuary. In many cabins, windows had accumulated to the ice grip of the freezing temperatures. Some were locked tight, trapping those inside as the murky waters invaded the quarters. The cries for help echoed through the steel halls, but as the water surged, those pleas gradually faded into an eerie silence swallowed by the entire chaos that enveloped the ship. 40 minutes into the harrowing ordeal, the bright lights that once illuminated the Gustloff flickered ominously before stumbling into total darkness for the last time. The ship was plunged into an inky blackness that felt suffocating. The cruel reality of the situation became starkly evident. Panic overtook many as they were faced with the grim choice to remain aboard or confront the frigid waters of the Baltic Sea. Desperation drove passengers to make split-second decisions. Some were violently thrown from the ship by the sinking, while others, in a moment of sheer instinct, hurled themselves into the icy embrace of the Baltic Sea. The chilling waters, with a bone-numbing temperature of just 39 degrees Fahrenheit, drew the sap of the strength of the even most capable swimmers. Meanwhile, a light snowfall began to gently blank the deck of the doomed Gustloff, creating a haunting contrast to the unfolding tragedy of those aboard the battle. Not only the rising water, but also the encroaching cold and despair that surrounded them. 15 minutes into the unfolding tragedy of the Gustloff, the sounds gave a haunting realization that the ship was an uncontrollable sinking mess. Passengers continued to jump or be thrown by the sheer lifts of the ship. After a faint sound of the ship's siren could be heard, giving an even more haunting tone. From the calm waters to the echoing of the abyss of darkness of the Baltic Sea. 15 minutes into the unfolding tragedy of the Gustloff, the sounds gave a haunting realization that the ship was an uncontrollable sinking mess. Passengers continued to jump or be thrown by the sheer lifts of the ship. After a faint sound of the ship's siren could be heard, giving an even more haunting tone. From the calm waters to the echoing of the abyss of darkness of the Baltic Sea. Finally, at 9:53 p.m., 70 minutes after the torpedo struck the Wilhelm Gustloff, she was completely on her port side. Not only her starboard side can be seen over the waterline, as she submerged beneath passengers and crew still on board, clinging to the hull. Left with nothing but darkness and the calm, freezing cold Baltic water, a 10-year-old passenger survivor, Forrest Wood, stated in his testimony, "A lot of people jumped, and they all tried to get on the lifeboat. Of course, they pull you over and get hit in the head with a paddle, and they get hit on the hands. It was gruesome and awful. Most of them died." Another passenger by the name of Paula Chris, I said that wrong. "I could clearly see the people still on board clinging to the rails, even as she went under. They were still hanging on and screaming. All around us, people were swimming or just floating in the sea. I could still see their hands grasping at the side of our boat." After the Wilhelm Gustloff sunk, passengers were left in the freezing cold, endless darkness of the night, in the middle of the Baltic Sea. The people of Lou were still trying to find his way to the wreck site of the Gustloff, though with the ship now sunk and no more stress caused since the power cut out. Lou had to use whatever findings they could with sounds and signals left. At 10:35, Blue had arrived and was the first vessel on scene to help the passengers. As the rescue continued, messages were sent to Germany and the Nazi Party, to which they responded to seize news about the sinking of the Gustloff. A private inquiry was held on January 1945 for the Wilhelm Gustloff. A few argued that the ship was not marked as a hospital ship or a civilian ship, though it was being used as a hospital ship and civilian ship before. The inquiry into the tragic sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff revealed a sobering conclusion. There was no indication that this ill-fated ship would operate as a civilian ship or a hospital ship, or was transporting civilians at all aboard at the time its demise. Therefore, investigations failed to uncover any evidence suggesting that Wilhelm Gustloff was a hospital ship or was carrying civilians. A classification that would have been effort into certain protections under the law of naval warfare. Given these circumstances, the inquiry firmly absolved the U-boat commander of responsibility for the catastrophic loss of the determination raised as critical questions after the investigation and the qualifications of naval vessels during the wartime. Knowing the complexities and harsh reality forced by both military and civilian operations in perilous times, and the implication of the ruling reverberated far beyond. After the sinking in the inquiries of the Wilhelm Gustloff, the public wasn't really told on the matter of the sunken vessel until January 31st, 1945, by the official channel of the Nazi Party. But intervening news was suppressed and downplayed by the Nazis that the Gustloff had sunk. The tragic sinking left about 1,000 to 1,250 passengers, while 9,000 to 10,000 souls lost their lives aboard this tragic loss of the Wilhelm Gustloff. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, hit the bell to not miss any of Story Tides videos. As well, be sure to join our Discord, which will be linked in the description below. Remember, I'm your friend, Story Tides, and I'll see you again in our next adventure.